You've had a glimpse of something greater, a higher truth, a deeper peace, and suddenly, the drive you once had vanishes. The ambitions, goals, and dreams that used to light a fire inside you now feel meaningless or even fake. You wonder, what's wrong with me? Why did I lose all motivation right after I began to wake up? You're not broken, you're transforming. In this talk, we're going to explore the hidden reason behind this motivational void that so many people experience after a spiritual awakening. Through the lens of Carl Jung's wisdom and modern spiritual psychology, we'll uncover the truth behind this silence, this pause, this emptiness, and why it might just be the most important phase of your journey. This is not the end of your fire. It's the clearing before it burns brighter than ever. You see, one of the most disorienting things that happens after a spiritual awakening is the collapse of the ego's illusion. And most people don't realize just how much of their so-called motivation was built on that illusion. We tend to assume that our ambitions, our goals, our drive, all of it, are expressions of our true self. But that's not entirely accurate. In reality, much of what we call motivation is actually ego compensation. It's the psyche attempting to assert control, to protect itself, to construct meaning through pursuit, often in the form of status, power, validation, or survival. Carl Jung, whose work we're anchoring this talk in, described the ego as the center of consciousness, but not the totality of the self. It's merely a fragment of provisional identity. Before awakening, the ego has been running the show. It tells you what matters. It sets your goals. It pushes you to become someone. But once awakening begins, something profound happens. The illusion that the ego is you starts to unravel. You begin to see that much of what you thought you wanted was shaped by cultural programming, by unresolved wounds, by fear and insecurity masquerading as ambition. This is not a comfortable realization. In fact, it's deeply unsettling. Suddenly, the ladder you've been climbing is revealed to be leaning against the wrong wall. The things that used to get you out of bed in the morning no longer spark that same fire. The rewards no longer feel rewarding, and so the motivation evaporates, not because you're lazy, not because you failed, but because the structure that was feeding that drive has collapsed. Now here's where the psychological depth really matters. The ego's collapse isn't just about losing motivation. It's a death of identity. You are witnessing the disintegration of a false self that was never meant to carry the full weight of your existence. The moment you begin to see through the ego, your psyche enters a state of liminality, a threshold space. You are no longer who you were, but not yet who you are becoming. And in this threshold, drive becomes quiet. Urgency gives way to reflection. It's like stepping out of a noisy crowd and into a silent room. The silence isn't empty, it's sacred. But if you don't understand what's happening, you'll interpret that silence as depression, aimlessness, or failure. This is why so many people panic. They try to rebuild the old scaffolding, resurrect the old ego, force themselves to care about things they've already outgrown. But that's not healing, that's regression. The truth is, the collapse of the ego's illusion is not something to fix, it's something to honor. It marks the beginning of your transition from ego-driven effort to soul-driven purpose. So if you've lost motivation after awakening, don't rush to escape it. Observe it, study it, let it reveal what was false, and wait for what is true to emerge. Because once it does, your motivation won't just return, it will transform. When the ego collapses, it feels like you've lost everything. But in truth, you're finally making space for the part of you that was waiting to lead all along. Another reason motivation seems to vanish after awakening is because the desires that used to fuel you, the ones that felt so urgent, so important, no longer resonate. This isn't just about disinterest. It's deeper than that. It's a psychological and existential shift in what your psyche is willing to pursue. You realize that much of your ambition was driven by things you didn't actually choose. Social validation, comparison, childhood wounds, the expectations of your parents, your culture, your peer group. It was all layered onto you, and it shaped your wants not based on inner truth, but on survival and conformity. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. When awakening strips those layers away, you're left exposed, raw. There's a moment, sometimes it lasts weeks, months, even years, where you feel like there's nothing left to want. You look at the old goals, climbing the corporate ladder, chasing attention on social media, buying things you can't afford to impress people you don't even like, and it just feels hollow, not wrong necessarily, but meaningless. And what you're actually experiencing is a psychological reorganization. The scaffolding of your desire system is being dismantled because it was built on unstable ground. This is something Carl Jung spoke to in his work on individuation, the process of becoming the self. As you begin to individuate, the ego must relinquish control, and that includes surrendering its false sense of purpose. The things you used to chase no longer have the same emotional charge. They don't compel you, because they don't speak to your deeper self. That's not dysfunction, that's clarity. Your soul is rejecting the counterfeit desires you were conditioned to chase. But this clarity comes with a cost, because when you're no longer chasing those external markers of success, you're left in an existential void. And that void can feel paralyzing. People start asking you, what's next? And you don't have an answer, not because you're directionless, but because your compass is recalibrating. You're no longer moving from reaction or compensation, you're learning, slowly, painfully sometimes, to move from truth. And make no mistake, this is a brutal stage, because modern culture doesn't teach you how to be still. It teaches you how to perform, how to chase, how to look productive. So when you stop chasing what doesn't matter, people think you've lost your edge. But in truth, you're finally getting in touch with what's real. What you're experiencing is not the loss of desire, it's the death of false desire. The next stage, and we'll talk about that, is learning how to listen for what remains after the noise fades. What still whispers to you in the quiet. Because that, right there, is your soul speaking. When your old desires die, don't mourn them, examine them. Their absence is not a void, it's a clearing, and only in that clearing can something real begin to grow. After a spiritual awakening, many people expect an immediate surge of clarity and motivation, a sudden burst of energy to pursue new goals and live a transformed life. But what often actually happens is quite the opposite, a period of stillness, even stagnation. This phase, which can feel frustrating and disheartening, is actually one of the most crucial parts of the awakening process. It's what Jungians might call the integration phase. It's not about rushing forward or forcing yourself into action. It's about allowing the profound internal shifts to settle and take root. Think about it like this. When a seed is planted, it doesn't immediately sprout into a towering tree. First, it must develop roots underground, unseen and silent, drawing nourishment from the soil, patiently growing stronger before it breaks through the surface. That hidden growth is what integration is. Quiet, internal work. Your psyche is recalibrating, reorganizing, and assimilating the new truths you've glimpsed. You're moving from disorientation into a new kind of coherence, but it takes time. Many people misunderstand this phase because our culture is obsessed with productivity and visible progress. We're conditioned to believe that if we're not visibly doing something, we're failing. But in reality, forcing action during this phase often backfires. It can lead to burnout, confusion, or even deeper despair because the ego is still grasping for control over something it no longer fully understands. Psychologically, integration means reconciling the conscious and unconscious parts of your mind. Your awakening has thrown light onto hidden shadows, traumas, and aspects of yourself you may have denied or ignored. These need to be acknowledged and absorbed, not pushed away. It's a process of becoming whole, which Jung called individuation. This inner work requires patience and humility. It's less about doing and more about being present with your discomfort, being curious about your inner experiences, and allowing the transformation to unfold organically. Philosophically, this integration phase reflects the natural rhythm of transformation itself. Change isn't linear, it's cyclical. There are times for action and times for rest, times to plant and times to harvest. Trying to skip the root, growing stage compromises the strength and longevity of the change you want to create. This period of apparent inactivity is actually fertile ground, preparing you for your next authentic movement. Understanding this can shift your relationship to your own process dramatically. Instead of judging yourself for feeling stuck or unmotivated, you can recognize that you're in a sacred gestational period. Your soul is rewriting its operating system. You're learning new ways of being that don't rely on old patterns or false motivations. So, when you find yourself in this quiet phase after awakening, resist the urge to fill the silence with noise or frantic effort. Instead, practice patience and presence. Trust that this inner recalibration is necessary. You're not stalled. You're evolving. Remember this. True growth happens beneath the surface, out of sight, where roots strengthen in silence. Embrace the integration phase as the foundation for your next, most profound chapter. Your deepest transformation depends on it. One of the most profound shifts that takes place after a spiritual awakening is the loss of reliance on external validation. Before awakening, much of what drives us, the motivation to work hard, to achieve, to succeed, is often tied directly to how others perceive us. We seek approval, recognition, status, or simply the reassurance that we belong and matter. This external validation acts as a psychological currency, feeding the ego's sense of worth and keeping the machinery of motivation running. But once awakening begins, this dynamic changes fundamentally. When you awaken, you start to see that basing your self-worth and motivation on other people's approval is fragile and ultimately unsatisfying. You recognize that the applause of the crowd, the accolades, the likes and shares, they don't bring lasting fulfillment. This realization can be liberating, but it also creates a vacuum. Suddenly, the external carrots that once propelled you forward lose their power. The motivational fuel that once came from outside no longer ignites the same fire within. This shift is not just a change in attitude, it's a profound psychological transformation. Your ego's need for external validation is being stripped away, and in its place, you're called to develop something much deeper, internal alignment. Instead of asking, "How do others see me?" or "What will they think if I fail?" you begin to ask, "What is true for me? And what aligns with my authentic self?" This transition is critical but challenging because internal alignment requires you to stand in your own truth without the usual safety net of social approval. Here's where the difficulty arises. Motivation rooted in external validation is immediate and often intense. It gives quick feedback and measurable results. Internal motivation, by contrast, is subtler and slower to develop. It demands patience, self-awareness, and courage. Without external markers, it can feel like drifting in a void. This is why many people experience a motivational collapse after awakening. The familiar scaffolding that supported their drive has been removed, but the new foundation isn't fully in place yet. Philosophically, this moment invites you to reconsider the source of your purpose. It forces a confrontation with questions that most people never face. What am I truly motivated by? What gives my life meaning independent of others' judgments? Carl Jung emphasized that true individuation, the process of becoming your true self, requires this break from collective expectations and external approval. It's a necessary but lonely path where motivation must be rekindled from within. The good news is that this internal alignment, once cultivated, leads to a far more resilient and authentic motivation. Motivation that isn't dependent on fleeting applause, but is anchored in your values, your purpose, and your connection to something greater than the ego. This kind of motivation sustains you through challenges and setbacks because it's not conditional. So if you find yourself feeling unmotivated after awakening, remember, this is a sign that you're shedding external dependencies and moving towards internal sovereignty. The absence of external validation can feel like emptiness, but it's actually an invitation, a call to cultivate a deeper, more enduring source of motivation. Reflect on this. Motivation built on the approval of others is like a house of cards, easily toppled. But motivation born from internal alignment is a foundation carved from stone. Your task is to build that foundation patiently and with courage. As we come to the close of this exploration, it's important to recognize that losing motivation after awakening is not a sign of failure or weakness. It's a crucial passage in your journey toward true selfhood. What feels like emptiness or stagnation is actually the space where transformation is quietly unfolding. The ego's old structures fall away, false desires dissolve, and the frantic chase for external approval loses its grip. In this clearing, you are being invited to rediscover motivation on a deeper level. Motivation rooted not in illusion, but in authentic purpose. This process demands patience, courage, and a willingness to sit with discomfort. It asks you to trust the unseen work happening beneath the surface, to honor the integration phase, and to embrace the silence before the next chapter emerges. Remember, motivation that lasts is not born from chasing shadows, but from aligning with your true self, your soul's unique calling. So, if you find yourself feeling lost or unmotivated after awakening, don't despair. Instead, see it as a profound opportunity to rebuild your life on firmer, more meaningful ground. The fire will return, stronger and purer than before, but only after you've done the essential work of inner recalibration. Take this time seriously, reflect deeply, and prepare yourself to step forward when the moment is right, carrying with you a motivation that can withstand any storm because it comes from within. Your transformation depends on it.